Hello, let us start worship today with this prayer. Make us one, Lord, make us one. Holy Spirit, make us one. Let your love flow so the world will know we are one in you. Amen. It is a beautiful thing to feel one with God, and I feel that every day when I go for my morning hike on the mountain where the presence of God envelops me completely. It is sacred time and it feeds my soul. But last week I left my sacred mountain and I descended deep into the valley where I felt a different kind of oneness with God, the kind that is felt only in community. I attended the annual gathering of the United Methodist clergy and laity, and what a joyful reunion that was. A huge ballroom filled with my people. In 3 days, my cup was filled to overflowing with love and grace, friendship and support, connection and affirmation. Those friends and colleagues gave me the courage to return to this beautiful but sometimes lonely place to do the work I am called to do. And I am pleased to report that I have been appointed to my 9th year of pastoral ministry here in Fall River Mills. Thanks be to God and to the bishop and her cabinet for allowing me to continue serving. My heart is full. And yet there was a shadow hovering over our gathering this year, for in spite of the many things we had to celebrate, pastoral appointments, new ordinations, exciting ministries, inspiring worship, we also had to vote on whether to allow 6 of our churches in our region to disaffiliate from the United Methodist connection. Now you might wonder, why would 6 churches want to leave a loving, affirming connection? The short answer is this: there is a possibility that the United Methodist Church, broadly speaking, might change some of the language in our rule book so that it would no longer be a chargeable offense for a pastor to officiate at a same-sex wedding, nor would it be a chargeable offense for a pastor to live openly as an LGBTQIA+ person. And for some folks, including the majority of people in those 6 disaffiliating congregations, the mere idea of allowing LGBTQIA+ people to be pastors in the church or to get married in the church is so disturbing that they would rather leave the connection than share space with those of us who hold a more inclusive view of the church. Now, my intention here is not to shame anyone for their theology. I can accept that there are different ways to read scripture and apply it to some of our contemporary questions, such as human sexuality, also medical ethics, even the place of women in the church. And differing interpretations of scripture can lead to conflict among the faithful. This is nothing new. Rabbis have always debated scripture. There's even an ancient saying, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. And a passing glance at the history of American Methodism reveals that we have been divided numerous times since our official launch date on Christmas Eve, 1784. Yes, we have split and splintered over questions of race, enslavement, distribution of power, even worship style. And this is by no means a Methodist problem. Christianity in general has experienced many divisions since the very beginning, as generations of disciples have debated how to follow Jesus faithfully. And I don't think any of this would have surprised Jesus all that much. He knew that to follow him was to invite controversy and conflict. You see, Jesus was never interested in preserving the status quo or in protecting the interests of the institutions. Jesus turned the tables on injustice of all kinds, made space at the table for those not on the guest list, loved the unlovable. He was amazingly gracious toward sinners and only ever expressed real anger toward those who pretended to be without sin. In his effort to bring God's shalom into the world, Jesus made some enemies. And even though he absolutely condemned the use of violence, rebuking Peter for using a sword against the very soldiers who had come to arrest him, Jesus knew that those who followed him wholeheartedly might be cut off from their communities as if by a sword. In one of his most difficult teachings, he said, "Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace but a sword, for I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and one's foes will be members of one's own household." Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever does not take up the cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. That's from Matthew 10. It's pretty rough to hear, isn't it? If you thought Jesus affirmed your idea of family values, these words are a challenge. Sons against fathers, daughters against mothers, daughters-in-law against mothers-in-law. I mean, yeah, we know that those relationships can be places of conflict, but because of Jesus? Isn't our faith the one thing that keeps us together? Ideally, yes, but for those earliest followers, Jesus' message of radical social change would be disruptive enough to cause people to split from their families. Because what if one member of the household did not wish to share their belongings with the poor or welcome the stranger into their homes? Jesus' followers were sworn to do just that, and if that meant leaving their family to be true to their faith, so be it. But as Jesus said, they would become part of a new family, which might actually include those that they might have considered to be foes. Not easy to do, is it? But if they really wanted to follow Jesus, that was the way it was having to work. 2,000 years later, we have softened Jesus' teachings just a bit, making it easier to call ourselves his followers. I mean, look at us, taking up our pretty golden crosses and wearing them on delicate chains around our necks. Oh, the things we will do for Jesus. We will even sacrifice some of our precious time to sit in a padded pew and stare at an even shinier cross. Bless our souls. But those who speak out on behalf of the oppressed, those who march in protest of racism and violence, those who sacrifice their own comfort to offer comfort to the hurting, those are the ones who know what Jesus meant about being on one side of a dividing sword. Several years ago, when government agents began scouring our nation, looking for persons lacking complete documentation, some churches offered sanctuary for those fearing deportation. My mom's church sheltered a woman named Rosa, who had immigrated to the U.S. just days after her 18th birthday, over 30 years prior. And in those decades, Rosa had built her entire life in this country. She owned a home and a business. She was active in her community and in her church. Mexico was the homeland of her deceased grandparents and distant relations. It was not her home. My mom's church gave Rosa sanctuary for over 3 years until the legal system could finally catch up with the decades-long backlog of cases and grant Rosa the legal security to set her foot outside the church building without fear of arrest and deportation. It was not easy for Rosa, nor for the church, yet they did this out of their theological conviction that it was God's will for them to love this foreigner in their midst, and that Jesus himself would have done likewise. And people left. The church lost members because of this. Now, fortunately for the disgruntled, there were plenty of other churches where their ideology was affirmed. You see, the sword hadn't cut that much off. It is painful for churches to lose members and for denominations to lose entire churches, but given Jesus' warning, it should not be surprising. Following Jesus comes with a risk that we will offend. In fact, simply being human comes with a guarantee that we will at some point offend. I only pray that when I do offend, it is not God I am offending. And I pray that those whom I do offend will have the grace to forgive me for my offenses, for aren't we all doing our best to live faithfully according to how we understand the teachings of Christ? The trouble is, it's hard to step back and take the wider view to see both ourselves and our shadows. You know, those parts of ourselves we dislike and tend to project onto others whom we shame or maybe even hate. The very wise and profoundly insightful Christian mystic, Father Richard Rohr, says, the shadow self allows us to do evil without recognizing it as evil. In fact, we often believe that we are doing something good. That is the power of the shadow. That is why Jesus criticizes hypocrisy more than anything else. Jesus is never upset with sinners, but only with people who pretend they are not sinners. Check this out, story by story in the Gospels. This is surprising and even shocking. Why is it that this clear pattern is seldom pointed out in sermons? It might have to do with the fact that religion often cannot see its own shadow and projects it elsewhere. Thus, the high degree of morally judgmental people among most religious groups, which allows them to remain untouched in their self-sufficiency, racism, militarism, and materialism. And I'll bet we could add a few more isms to that list. But lest I cross that line into the camp of those who believe themselves to be without sin, I do confess, as a sinner, I do find some people challenging to love, and some of those folks stood up at our big gathering last week and said some hurtful things about our church and about the people we are striving to love and include, people I'm proud to call my colleagues, people who just happen to live and love a little differently than I do. I am trying to love even those who believe themselves to be morally superior to the rest of us, even if we are not able to stay in peaceful connection with each other. That sword has sliced us apart from one another, and I do not claim to know which side is being more faithful to Jesus, because both would say with equal conviction that it is theirs. So our denomination may not be a great example of peace at this time, but I do pray that we will remain an example of love. Love for all of God's children, however they are created, and if I err, let it be on the side of love, even if to do so means disrupting the peace. It pains me somewhat to sing this song today because we are not one in the spirit, but I will sing it with optimism that one day we may be one again. Schisms have been known to mend, but in the meantime, I do pray that all who know us may know we are Christians, not by our disdain of some, but by our love of all. So, God bless you all.